introduce Philip. So thanks very much, Philip, for being with us, because I know you're busy with the whole development of the strategy. So you're Associate Director in Sustainable Futures with KPMG in future fuels and energy decarbonisation. Has over 9 years experience working in the energy industry in Ireland with large utility companies and with the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications. And you've been working with the Department of Ag and the Department of DECC in terms of the National Biomethane Strategy. So I suppose, and I think you have a couple of slides as well, but just maybe explain your own role in KPMG and what you do, first of all, before we maybe go into the slides that you have.
Perfect, thanks very much. Yes, so my name is Connolly, Associate Director, KPMG Sustainable Futures. So we're a dedicated energy and ESG advisory team. So there's a team of about 35 of us. Don't worry, we're not all tax and accountants. We're all actually experts hired in from engineering firms, ESG, we've biodiversity experts, etc. And my own role focuses mainly on decarbonisation and energy advisory for large corporates. So we help large corporates kind of design their decarbonisation strategy, setting their 2030 or 2050 goals, and then we work with them on a technical aspect on how they can actually decarbonise. So biomethane is obviously a very large part of that as well. And
I know we're all waiting on the biomethane strategy, and there was quite a bit of discussion on the earlier panel this morning about the, about that, and the lads were very cagey in terms of giving us any information. But look, I don't expect you to either, but just if I think you wanted to talk maybe specifically about the potential development opportunities which exist in terms of biomethane. So we have, I think, 3 slides from you, so it's quite slides, short. Yeah. So if you want to run through them, Philip, there, and maybe explain your slides, that would
perfect.
Be very
so
useful.
I've probably been working in biomethane now for maybe 6 or 7 years in Ireland. As you mentioned, worked in DEC, and we developed the first renewable heat policy, or renewable heat obligation, back in 2020, 2021. But the shift over the last 12 to 18 months in terms of interest in biomethane in Ireland has been incredible. And I think a lot of that is driven by our target for 2030. So 5.7 terawatt hours by 2030, 10% of our demand, of natural gas demand, which seems like a pretty small figure when you think about it, 10%. But when you think of Ireland specifically, 50% of our natural gas goes into the power sector. So immediately, if you take that away, this 5.7 terawatt hours could be actually meeting 20% of our non-power generation demand. So it's a pretty substantial figure. Lots of work has been done as well around feedstock availability. So the SEI, the heat study, has identified that we have a good indigenous resource. So just monumental change over the last kind of 12 to 18 months on biomethane. And if you go on to the next slide, unfortunately, we haven't started developing those plants. So you can kind of see this trajectory is getting a little bit steeper year on year. And done quick calculation on it last night. If we are to meet our 5.7 terawatt hour target, we're going to have to develop about 20 to 40 gigawatt hour plants per annum. So Mary Donnelly pretty much covered the planning system earlier pretty well when she said, try building 20 houses in a year. Try building 22 AD plants per year for the next 7 years. It's going to be really, really difficult.
I think your next slide is interesting too, in terms of this.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to show this. So this is basically, if you look at Denmark and the UK, on the same timelines, they have actually delivered 5.7 terawatt hours in 7 years. But we need to look at the policies that they had in place. So within Denmark and the UK, they both had a feed-in tariff. So for every unit of biomethane you injected into the grid, you were given a tariff of, I think in the UK, it's about 6p per kilowatt hour now. They also probably had a little bit more favourable policy in terms of planning. So if I was to break down, let's say, the timeline to build an AD plant in Ireland from scratch today, my planning permission might take a year, my grid connection might take a year, my EPA licence might take 2 years, my construction's going to take a year. So we're into a 4 to 5 year period, and if we have to do that 22 times for the next 7 years, we're probably stretching to hit that 5.7 terawatt hours unless we can do things within the strategy and within other kind of policies to make this easier to do for developers. And then if you want to switch on to the next slide, some of you might be aware of this concept, and it's probably similar to your slide. It's kind of the end uses for biomethane. So biomethane being a limited resource. So we've identified 5.7 by 2030. G&I have identified a larger resource by probably after 2030, and we'll do some sustainability checks around that to make sure that we can actually get to that higher number. But it's going to be limited, so we're going to have to use it where it has the biggest bang in terms of CO2 emissions reductions. So some of these I've just put down, and this concept is kind of floating around the hydrogen space as well. Michael Liebreich has a really good hydrogen ladder, and John Baldwin from CNG Services has kind of repurposed it into a biomethane ladder. So like your top ones are your high temperature thermal heat. So where heat pumps can't work at the moment, or there's just not that over 200 degree heat pump operating, let's say economically at the moment, biomethane is a perfect solution. And then your heavy duty transport, for those trucks that travel over, let's say 1,000 kilometers a day, we all might have seen the DHL announcement a couple of days ago that they're buying biomethane for 100 of their CNG trucks. So for things like that, it's a really good use of biomethane. And then for, let's say, I'm not saying that it won't be used in the domestic heat sector, but heat pumps seem to be the solution for domestic heat in Ireland. They work really, really well in new builds, and we're doing lots of retrofits and lots of heat pumps, as Fergus mentioned earlier. So using biomethane for domestic heat probably isn't the best solution if we have a limited sustainable resource. And then the next slide, basically, we're not going to be able to control where the biomethane goes, because those willing to pay the premium price for biomethane is where it will go. So on the left-hand side, well, the way I'm looking at the screen side, left-hand side, so it's kind of willingness and ability to pay. So obviously for residential people, that's really, really low. People are not going to be willing to spend 12, 13, 14 cent a kilowatt hour for biomethane to say that, oh, I purchase green gas, because they get no kudos really for it. But on the other extreme, if you're a data center or you're a high temperature heat user or a pharmaceutical, and you have a 2030 corporate goal to be zero carbon, you're going to have to pay whatever the price is to buy that biomethane. So it's kind of just saying the ability and willingness to pay for biomethane will probably direct where this resource goes in Ireland. But that's all my slides, so happy to take any questions.
Is there any other points you'd like to make, Philip, in terms of the market and the opportunity, separate, or even anything on that kind of is coming to mind from the point of view of your work on the strategy and your engagement with various different stakeholders? Is there anything that you'd like to dwell on, or that's kind of featuring very strongly across all the stakeholders you've engaged with?
Yes, so as Redmond mentioned earlier on the panel, we engaged with, I think it was over 60 stakeholders to discuss the biomethane strategy, and we met yourself as well with some of your colleagues. The level of interest in Ireland from international players in terms of getting involved in biomethane is really, really substantial. Loads of developers from the UK, Germany, France, Denmark, we're all looking at opportunities to enter the Irish market. And then if we were to go to the demand side for biomethane, we identified a number of corporates, including DHL and some of the large pharmaceutical companies in Ireland, who are really, really keen to purchase biomethane. And things that pop up for them in terms of biomethane, it's sustainability. They're really, really keen on sustainability, and they will not purchase biomethane that doesn't meet the criteria and doesn't have a green gas certificate, obviously. And that they want indigenous supply as well. So they don't want to be importing biomethane from other countries. They want to actually help the agri sector in Ireland to decarbonise. And to touch on the farming sector as well, the farming sector were really, really supportive when we met them. So we met a lot of the agri-food co-ops, we met with the IFA, and they wanted to see a really, really important role for farmers. So this is, as mentioned earlier, it's going to be an agri-centric biomethane strategy. So making sure that the farmers are part of the AD solution is going to be critical.
Yeah, that's all very interesting. And I think if I just come back to Anna, just to conclude on the biomethane, do you think the supply chain across Europe will have the capacity to develop all this biomethane? Because we're talking about big plans in Ireland, we're talking about big plans right across the EU. Do you think, is there any concerns, have IrBEA any concerns about the potential capacity of the supply chain to provide the technology, provide the, all that workforce that will be required, or have you done any work on that?
Well, indeed, it's going to be a lot of work, but we have already seen with the NECPs that a lot of member states are already working on their own strategies. We see a very good strategy in France and being also mirrored in Italy. So it will depend also on the pace and on the actual level of development in different member states. But we see that there is a lot of interest in many member states. There is more the need to create maybe the environment for having better and scope better the investments. But the potential is definitely there.